10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Every dawn marks a new beginning, a new sky, traced by the most advanced technology, constantly evolving, where the future takes shape between heaven and earth, where precision meets expertise. Domain and borderless strategies. Because the future of aerospace is not built alone, but requires alliances and vision. Aerospace is not a boundary. It is our field of action. It is our horizon.
AeroSpace Power Conference 2025. Fighting and winning in the sky beyond the next decade.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Aeronautica Militare welcomes you to the second day of the AeroSpace Power Conference. I'm Greta Cristini, and I will be your host for today's session as well. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that today as well, our session will be streamed on Aeronautica Militare YouTube channel, that the conference will be held in Italian and in English, and that headsets for simultaneous translation are available from our hostess in gallery and plenary hall. As yesterday as well, I kindly ask you to silence your phone, please. Yesterday, thanks to our esteemed panelists and keynote speakers, we had an intense and hopefully fruitful discussion about the critical role of air and space power in modern warfare and how it can be a driving force for the development of new disruptive technologies and a stimulus for the aerospace industry. Today, we will continue with the same spirit and build on yesterday's considerations. In the battlefield, technology, warfare, and the operational concepts where they intersect are never static. Instead, they're always in motion. And while it may take years or even decades to fully grasp their implications, it is incumbent upon us to discern key themes as soon as possible. The conflict in Ukraine, for instance, especially underscored how adapting the traditional doctrines to incorporate new tactics can significantly enhance a nation's defensive capabilities. The takeaway here is that military doctrines must evolve to reflect the changing nature of the character of war, and in our specific case, the evolving meaning of air superiority. This includes developing new tactics for operating in contested airspace and training personnel to operate across multiple domain mindsets. To determine which militaries would win a future war, look at the quality of their people, their existing capabilities, and their emerging technologies. Look at how they fuse all three into new ways of fighting, operating, and adopting innovation at speed and scale. Now, for this difficult task of elaborating on the issue of integrating technology and innovative thinking into military operations to form the next generation of air power leaders, we have invited one of the most knowledgeable personalities on this topic to join us. It's our honor to welcome to the stage Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton, the Royal Air Force's Chief of the Air Staff.
Wow, thank you. Let me start by thanking my Italian counterparts, Lieutenant General Luca for the remarkably kind invitation and the opportunity to speak at this fantastic conference in what must be the most beautiful city in the world. Luca, you have been a great friend to me and to the United Kingdom in your time as Chief and in my 2 years in this role. You have also been a fantastic ambassador for your Air Force and for your nation. You've been bold, you've been thoughtful, and most of all, you have been collaborative. With your departure as the Italian Chief fast approaching, I want to say on behalf of the Royal Air Force and all of our fellow Air Chiefs here, your friends, thank you. And we wish you continued success in whatever comes next. Luca, thank you. Greta, thank you for the kind introduction, and I look forward to hearing the considered thoughts from the panel and the impressive team of experts that you have on it later. Now, I've been asked to set up the panel for a lively debate and to give you a keynote on doctrine and leadership. Now, these are not always topics that set the pulse racing, but both are critical components of our success as air forces and are often overlooked. Given their importance to military power, it's surprising that this is not an issue we talk about more. But when we think of air power, the image that is conjured in our minds is 9 times out of 10 an aircraft. You've seen the pictures this morning. Something cutting edge, sleek, fast, agile. We rarely think about the enabling elements that turn the metal, or today the composites, into a real military capability. We also don't always think about how we combine the multiple capabilities across our Air Force, never mind our joint or allied partners. Since its birth, air power has relied on a foundation of scientific technology for its superiority. Air forces across the world attract bright, driven, inquisitive people with a passion and an understanding for this technology and the unique, unforgiving environment that we seek to operate in and aviators conquer. It's perhaps inevitable then that our thinking and attitudes tends to be focused on our highly advanced equipment and the gladiators of the skies who have mastered its employment. We idolize past exploits of our predecessors. We remember the brave, maverick tacticians with their heroic tales of daring do. We talk less about those at the strategic level who made the pivotal decisions that determine the outcome of wars. As a result, we venerate and reward deep, passionate subject matter experts with their limited field who rarely lift their eyes above the tactical or beyond the technical. And our strengths are also our weaknesses. Tactical acumen does not necessarily translate to operational or strategic success or leadership. The tactical excellence is just one element of the skill set that we need for today's and tomorrow's complex, contested, and constantly changing battle space. But it is not enough on its own. We must deliver campaign-winning plans and capabilities. And as I will argue, the 3 I's of innovation, integration, and influence are critical traits that we need to inculcate in our air and space power leaders to ensure that they think, prepare and execute their roles today, tomorrow and together. So why then do I think these are important traits today? In 2025, the world remains a volatile place. We live in an era of profound uncertainty and the most perilous period in the last 40 years. We have enjoyed the peace dividend born out of Cold War victory and a 30-year focus on counterinsurgency operations, fighting generally far from home with a secure home base, no existential threat to our nations, and with manageable impact on the public purse. Today, we face multiple and multiplying threats. War has returned to the European continent, instability endures in the Middle East, and the US's pivot to the Indo-Pacific and its hard rhetoric are now unambiguous. Great power competition is back on the agenda, and as the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, said recently, we must recognise the new era we are in, not cling hopelessly to the comforts of the past. The world has changed, and the character of warfare has changed with it. The war in Ukraine provides us with ample evidence. General Zaluzhny, the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK and the former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, said that wars of manpower and mass are finished. What wins now is adaptation, speed, iteration. Victory in modern war now depends on speed of innovation and implementation. Those who integrate AI, drones and electronic warfare systems faster than their enemy will not just win, they will dominate. These important lessons are hard won through blood, sweat and tears. For the modern military strategist, Ukraine provides a rich insight into how technology is once again changing the character of conflict, and how leaders must continually adapt to achieve their goals and stay ahead of their enemy. But we also know that history is littered with examples of nations that have focused on the lessons of the past to the detriment of understanding and embracing innovative technology and changes in the character of war. So while Ukraine provides us with brutal examples of the changing character of conflict, they may not necessarily be the examples relevant to tomorrow's conflicts. Some have argued that the war in Ukraine is a 19th century war fought with 20th century tactics and 21st century weapons. All of us have an enduring duty to protect and secure our nations, our allies and our interests. While the demand is constant, the character of war is constantly evolving as technology and our enemies adapt. To succeed and carry out our duty, we must embrace the changing strategic environment and prepare for 21st century warfare with 21st century capabilities and, critically, 21st century thinking to match. While history offers us numerous examples of how to and how not to fight, we simply cannot afford to refight the Cold War, the last 3 decades of counterinsurgency operations, nor, actually, the current Russia-Ukraine war. Now, more than at any time in our careers, air and space power are needed to secure our nation, our interests and our way of life. Mastery of the air and space are essential requirements for success in future fights. Now, in the UK, we have a reputation for being good on operations and great in a crisis. We react well, but don't always prepare well for future wars. As Churchill warned, we've usually been given time to muddle through. We're not likely to be given such grace in the future. This is not solely a British problem. It affects us all today. We, our friends, our allies, need to tackle the issue today, tomorrow, and together. Here, in his home nation, I must reflect on the wisdom of the Italian air power theorist Dewey when he said, "Victory smiles upon those who anticipate the change in the character of war, not on those who want to adapt themselves after the change occurs." Western air and space power must not squander what little time we have. We must embrace this emerging technology and the changing character of war by embracing innovation, by exerting influence, and driving integration. The challenge we face today is daunting. Time is against us. We face a battle-hardened foe, and our budgets, force structures and training all have limits. Thankfully, though, we've been here before, and we are not starting from scratch. Our predecessors have faced similar challenges and delivered hard-won victories. To give us some insights, some lessons, I want to focus on two individuals from my own service who delivered campaign, if not war-winning, success in times of adversity by embracing and integrating technology and change to meet the needs of the constantly changing character of war. My story starts in, of all places, my hometown of Derby in central England. You won't have heard of it. During the Second World War, the Rolls-Royce factory in Derby produced the famous Merlin engine, which powered, amongst others, the Spitfire and Hurricane of the Battle of Britain. After the war, and to mark the company's contribution to the victory in the skies over southern England in the summer of 1940, the company commissioned a beautiful stained glass window. It can still be seen in Derby Cathedral today, when it was unveiled in 1949 by one of my predecessors as Chief of the Air Staff, Arthur Tedder. There'll be more on him later. He spoke about the victory emanating from it. From the drawing board, in the laboratory, in the foundry, on the test rigs, in the machine shops, and on the production line. As it does today, defence industrial support was key to the Allied victory. But it was only one element of a more comprehensive strategy to defend the United Kingdom from an existential threat. Developing, delivering, and executing that strategy was driven by one individual in particular, Air Chief Marshal Hugh, known as Stuffy Dowding, who led Fighter Command to a critical victory over the skies in southern England in the summer of 1940. This year, yesterday marks the 85th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, an event that is at the centre of the Royal Air Force's DNA. Sadly, 2025 also marks the passing of the last of the few, when Group Captain Paddy Hemingway, a Hurricane pilot during the battle, passed away at the remarkable age of 105 just a few weeks ago. Paddy and the rest of the few, Dowding was a father figure. He was the architect of the Battle of Britain's success. He was the right person in the right place at the right time. But it was no accident. By the mid-1930s, he'd completed a 6-year tour as the Air Member for Supply and Research, where he was responsible for equipping the future RAF during a period of strategic turmoil, significant expansion, and the introduction of many new technologies. During his tour, Dowding's primary concern was the emerging technology needed to build a modern Air Force. He understood the technology, its utility, and its significance. Because of his deep understanding of the threat and of the emerging technology, the Hurricane, the Spitfire, and radar would soon enter RAF service. But these were only the metal, the hardware. It needed more, and Dowding's next move would prove to be the catalyst. In 1936, Dowding was posted to the newly formed Fighter Command to be its first commander. Over the next 4 years, he would design, build, deliver, and operate an integrated air defence system that combined the emerging technology into an innovative system that would make the critical difference. By 1940, the Dowding system, as it became known, was in place and just in time. Despite operating with a smaller force, the Dowding system allowed Fighter Command to mass its firepower in the right place at the right time. It was efficient, effective, and provided a decisive advantage. Many argue to this day that in isolation, the German fighters and radars were technically superior to their British counterparts. But the various German components were not integrated together until much later in the war. It was the system and not the individual component parts that mattered. The system was quite literally greater than the sum of its parts. Through his innovative integrated air defense system, Dowding drove a change in the character of war. He was not merely reacting to the opposition's gambit, he was one step ahead of the enemy for now. But Dowding's success would have been limited if he had not been able to exert influence. In May 1940, during the Battle of France, Dowding was able to persuade Churchill that no more RAF fighters could be sent to France. It was imperative to preserve the RAF fighter force at home in sufficient scale to defend Britain for the inevitable and imminent battle. Churchill relented. France sadly fell, but the UK and its allies would remain in the fight. As for integration, and as with any new capability, concepts and doctrine need to be tested and adjusted through rigorous and regular training exercises to ensure the various components work seamlessly together. By the summer of 1940, this was a mature capability that integrated the fighter squadrons, the observer corps, the radar operators, the controllers, and the anti-aircraft batteries. The brutal lessons from the 1939 Battle of Barking Creek fratricide incident had been learned the hard way. Dowding richly deserves the accolades for a superbly orchestrated plan that was well executed. But he was not without his dissenters and challengers. In 1940, the Dowding system was still maturing. As a result, tactics, training, and procedures, what we might reasonably describe today as doctrine, was still being refined by the RAF fighter leaders, who were not renowned for being shy, retiring types of character. Now, there is a fine balance between fixing best practice too early and exploiting an emerging capability, particularly when adapting to the realities of conflict. And I'm conscious that I am speaking to a well-informed audience, but as a reminder, during the battle, Lee Mallory, one of Dowding's key subordinates, advocated for the big wing concept, where multiple fighter squadrons will be massed to maximise their firepower. The concept made sense in theory, but failed to deliver in reality, and meant that Lee Mallory's squadrons overlooked their primary role of defending the airfields. Dowding could be critiqued for allowing the debate to cause friction and competition between his two key subordinates, rather than nurturing a more collegiate approach. So leadership matters at all levels. And while Dowding focused on what was undoubtedly his relentless and fatiguing main effort, the daytime defence of the UK, he paid limited attention to the increasing scrutiny from his masters regarding the ever-growing number of night raids on Britain's major cities. Failing or unwilling to invest and change the nascent RAF night fighting capability was his downfall. The German raid on the city of Coventry saw no Luftwaffe losses to RAF night fighters during an 8-hour bomber stream. As a result, Dowding's position as the head of the fighter command became untenable. He quickly found out that the changing character of war is relentless and respects no one. So we must continue to innovate or face defeat. As the architect of the Battle of Britain retired from the RAF, another key RAF leader now entered the fray and would do so for the remainder of the war. That was the then Air Vice Marshal Arthur Tedder. So while Dowding was leading the RAF in the Battle of Britain, Tedder was, by his own admission, one of the backroom boys. At the start of the war, Tedder was Director General for Research before moving on to the Ministry for Aircraft Production. He was a technocrat. Tedder, like Dowding, understood the technology and scientific basis of modern warfare. But even by British standards, Tedder was had a quirky humour, as well as a quick mind and a very sharp tongue. Consequently, many underestimated him, Churchill included, who thought he was a man of nuts and bolts, useful but not for operational command, and unlikely to provide inspirational leadership in a war currently being lost. Tedder's leadership was based on professional knowledge and competence as an air component commander. Later in the war, he became Eisenhower's deputy in the Mediterranean, North Africa, Sicily, and from D-Day to VE Day. Through his success in these roles, he would prove Churchill wrong. Tedder, in fact, received the rarest of prizes, an apology from Churchill. Unlike many of his peers, Tedder was a humble and quiet man, one likely to go unnoticed, but not by history. Behind that quiet persona was a shrewd, determined, courageous individual with an analytical mind and a superb judgment. Strong hands, velvet gloved, as one colleague described him. During the war, Tedder fought three enemies: the Axis powers, ignorance, and arrogance. In battling his last two enemies, ignorance and arrogance, his approach was to assume that his joint and later Allied peers were reasonable people who had a common purpose and could be persuaded to see where the truth lay. At the operational level, he faced initial pushback from the two more senior services who wanted air power tied to their tasks. Tedder advocated for air power in the joint environment. Air superiority was, he said, the prerequisite to winning operations, whether at sea, on land, or in the air. Tedder proved to be an acolyte rather than a zealot by understanding how air power's unique contribution enabled and supported the wider theatre and military campaign by being integrated by design. By integrating with the other services, he changed the character of war in the Mediterranean and Western Desert. Tedder's efforts and results generated several air power advocates, including, of all people, General Montgomery. Tedder's innovation was conceptual and at the operational level rather than Dowding's tactical and physical approach during the Battle of Britain. The best practices created in North Africa became the basis for operations in Sicily, Italy, and the European theatre of operations. It also enabled Tedder to become even more influential when the US forces entered the battle. While Dowding's influence weakened over time, Tedder's strengthened and elevated his integration from the operational to the strategic level when he became Eisenhower's deputy for the remainder of the war. As Churchill said, Tedder was the aviation lobe to Eisenhower's brain, but he was no mere airman. Others suggest Tedder was Ike's chief advisor, consultant, and strategic co-pilot. And while we tend to focus on the leader, we can often overlook the value of the ones who are trusted to influence and support the key strategic individual, particularly those operating in a coalition environment. Ultimately, Dowding kept us in the game at a critical point, but it was Tedder who was the architect of victory. Today, we need a blend of Dowding and Tedder's traits to embrace innovation, to integrate technology, and for it to be an effective capability, they need to be able to influence our partners and domains and the other domains to exploit air power for success. And while Tedder and Dowding were both very different characters, we can draw some lessons from their approach. If we want to create Tedder 2.0 or a Dowding 2030, there are 5 lessons I would offer from their predecessors. First, build your knowledge through experience. Both Tedder and Dowding were in procurement and research-based roles before they took on key operational command appointments. Both were inquisitive individuals who took a keen interest in their profession of arms. Today, we must plan for our future success and not let it happen by luck and circumstance. For those who've been fortunate enough to walk the halls of the USAF School of Advanced Air and Space Studies, they will walk past Thucydides' insightful quote, "The strongest are those brought up in the hardest schools." Our brightest and best must school themselves for future challenges, the emerging technology and innovative ways of working. We must prepare them with relevant appointments, bespoke training and experience, or focused professional military education. Thinking about tomorrow and its challenges must be part of our DNA. Second, we need to build a collegiate team with redundancy. Both Tedder and Dowding had trusted and empowered subordinates in Keith Park and Mary Conyngham. However, other subordinates were more challenging to work with. Building a like-minded team can create cohesion, unity, and effort and redundancy. But does it create the challenge to stimulate innovation? Getting that balance right is tricky. Offering too much latitude can create unwanted tension, as was evident before, during, and after Dowding's big wing debate in 1940. Leadership of our most precious resource, our people, matters. As Confucius once said, to lead an untrained people to war is to throw them away. Third, then, we need to build trust and experience. Train, train, and train. The disastrous Battle of Barking Creek demonstrated that Dowding's system was far from perfect, but its potential was evident. Thankfully, there was sufficient time to understand, adapt, integrate, and build the required system of trust. Trust is also relevant at the operational and strategic level. Tedder had dissenters, like Churchill, when he initially moved into his operational command appointment. But the RAF command chain trusted him and protected him, including my wartime predecessor, Air Chief Marshal Charles Portal. They knew Tedder could deliver what was required, as he possessed sound judgment based on experience, education and thinking. They also understood his utility to the service, country and allies. Von Moltke the Elder would have approved. First reckon, then risk. Today, how much risk and pain are we willing or can afford to endure in capabilities, people and events to achieve our goals? So next, learn the lessons. Introducing new capabilities, ways of working or operating constructs into service is always a challenging period. Some will embrace the change, others will fight against it. Either way, there will be lessons, often hard-won. Developing, distributing and implementing relevant and effective concepts and best practices through doctrine is key. Using it is even more important. The United Kingdom has a love-hate relationship with doctrine. It is best explained through the eyes of an opponent. General Rommel said, "The British write the best manuals in the world. Thank God they don't read them." Our challenge is to make concept and doctrine relevant, timely and easy to understand. With this in place, the late, great and much missed Professor Richard Holmes' view can become a reality. Doctrine is not just what is taught or what is published, but it's what is believed. So fifth and last, keep scanning the horizon for the next event. While Dowding was utterly focused on fighting the Battle of Britain during daytime, he failed to prepare for the German switch to night operations. In contrast, Tedder was in the right place at the right time with the right skill set and experience to jump from a joint component command in North Africa to a strategic leadership role in a coalition environment in Europe. Today, where are the global challenges beyond what we see right now? Are we prepared for them? And what skills do we need to innovate, to integrate, and to influence? We must stay ahead of our opposition. As General Patton advised, untutored courage is useless in the face of educated bullets. So we must develop, design, and implement and operate the educated bullets for tomorrow's wars. We are aware of the increasing importance of space, cyber, artificial intelligence, uncrewed systems, to name just a few of the emerging technologies. But what is next in terms of threat, capabilities, operating areas and partnerships? What is beyond the horizon of great power competition? And are we thinking about tomorrow now? Who is that Tedder 2.0 or the Dowding 2030? In summing up, I am reminded of Neil Cameron, one of Dowding's few from 1940, and another one of my predecessors from the mid-1970s, who would challenge audiences with the following question: where are the Trenchards, the Mitchells, the Douays, the Arnolds, the Sletters of today? Well, the technical and strategic situation has changed significantly over the last 50 years. The need for credible and effective air and space power acolytes and leaders remains. Cameron's question remains valid today. Who is embracing the emerging technology, cultivating our concepts and doctrine through relevant and effective education and training to defeat our opponents? We need a new generation of air power thinkers and leaders that can develop, deliver, field and use campaign-winning capabilities. For tomorrow's leaders, we seek the skills we have seen in the past, but adapted for the modern world. We need people with the foresight, expertise and drive of Dowding, but with Tedder's strategic vision and ability to work collegiately with allies and our sister services. Both Dowding and Tedder had their flaws and their detractors, but between them they demonstrated innovation, influence and integration. I would contend that all three traits are still needed for success today. And as Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the Second World War French fighter pilot, said, "The time for action is now. It is never too late to do something." Today we have the ability, the intent, the opportunity, and most importantly, the need to exploit new technology, integrate across all 5 domains, and win the battle for influence with our decision makers. With war already in Europe, now is the right time to do something. So I look forward to hearing the views of our esteemed group of panelists on how we exploit leadership, doctrine, training and education to deliver that competitive advantage today, tomorrow and together. So lucky Sophy, Holger, Luca and Rosie, I will leave you in the capable hands of Greta with the clear, focused and succinct words of Tedder's to his troops on the eve of battle. Good hunting. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton for your inspiring words. Now, let's dive right into the core of our panel discussion. And first, please, let's take a look at the screen for a brief video introduction.
Leadership and military doctrine are the core of a strong aerospace defense, ready to counter emerging threats. But in an evolving landscape, every leader must be prepared to anticipate changes, to face growing complexities, to drive their strategic vision toward new frontiers of defense and security, to evolve their thinking and their effectiveness.
AeroSpace Power Conference 2025. Fighting and winning in the sky beyond the next decade.
As doctrine is influenced by technological innovation, concepts like system of systems and multi-domain operations have become more and more important. Artificial intelligence is also set to change the human-machine interface, therefore the future role of aviators in air operations and the whole human-in-the-loop equation when it comes to decision-making. Also, next-generation aircraft, as we just saw yesterday with GCAP, will bring further changes and challenges for future pilots. Against this backdrop, the ability of timely decision-making, a risk-prone attitude, education and training in an increasing virtual environment have a direct impact on the defining characteristics of future aviators. We'll discuss all this with distinguished experts, so without further ado, let's welcome to the stage our moderator, Dr. Alessandro Marrone, Head of Defense, Security and Space Program at Istituto Affari Internazionali. We are particularly happy to have Dr. Marrone on the stage, as it was the case 2 years ago, as Istituto Affari Internazionali is a scientific partner of this conference. And now let's welcome our 5 distinguished experts. Dr. Heather R. Penney, Director of Studies and Research at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. Dr. Sophy Antrobus, Research Fellow at the Freeman Air and Space Institute at King's College. Major General Jefferson J. O'Donnell, Commander of the U.S. Air Force Personnel Center. Major General Holger Neumann, Commander of Flying Units at the German Air Force Forces Command. And Major General Luca Maineri, Commander of both Air Component Command and Deployable Air Command and Control Center at Aeronautica Militare. Now, before we begin the discussion, I'd like to remind you, everyone from the audience, that you will be able to actively influence the discussion, as it was the case for yesterday. So before and during each panel, you will be able to submit any question using the question section of the ASPC 25 app on your smartphone. Few of them will be selected by our academic division and transmitted to the moderator's tablet for further discussion. Having said that, Dr. Marrone, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Greta. Buongiorno, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure, an honor for me to moderate such a distinguished panel in front of such a great audience. And my team at the Institute started to work on this conference 1 year ago with the Air Force, with Aeronautica Militare, and it's really great to see ideas turn into reality. So yesterday, you heard about strategy, policy, technology, and industry. In this panel, we'll rather focus, as mentioned by Greta, on doctrine, leadership, and training. That means we will talk about the people, the servicemen and the servicewomen in the Air Forces. And in his first speech, if you remember, yesterday, General Goretti stressed that the human element is, quote unquote, irreplaceable. And if you remember, this word in the screen behind us was in capital letter. I'm sure it's not by chance. When I heard and read that irreplaceable, it came to my mind the movie Top Gun Maverick. Because there is a famous scene where a general tells to Tom Cruise, and I quote, "The end is inevitable, Maverick. Your kind is headed for extinction." And he replies, "Maybe so, sir, but not today." Well, I know that quoting a Navy pilot in front of an Italian Air Force audience may cause me some problems in the future, but this is a risk-prone conference, and I take that risk because I think that that scene captures some of the challenges posed by technological innovation, including drones and artificial intelligence, to the role of aviators. More seriously, doctrine, and therefore training, is influenced by technological innovation, and it entails a conceptualization of technology, of the innovation. And we had a great keynote speech about that. Greta already mentioned system of system, multi-domain operation, concepts increasingly important for NATO members, artificial intelligence, next-generation fighter aircraft, GCAP as a system of system. I think that because of the Air Force force structure, because of the platform in service, because of the feature of this domain, leadership is extremely important at various levels, down to the chain of command. It includes the ability of timely decision-making and a risk-prone attitude. That's a further reason why education and training remain crucial to cultivate these and other aspects of leadership, but they to evolve in light of changing doctrine and novel technology. A military personnel operating assets in the space domain will need a novel and tailored training. It's not by chance that the US Space Force refer to its servicemen and servicewomen as guardians, not as aviators. This was just to set the scene for our panel. I'm now glad to give the floor to our speakers. The rules of engagement are quite simple. Each speaker will talk 8 minutes, sharp, by addressing my question, hopefully. Then I will open the floor for questions by the audience, and please take the opportunity to engage in the debate. We have plenty of time to make your questions to the audience, to the speakers. Let me start by Major General Jefferson O'Donnell, Commander, Air Force Personnel Center. Jeff, which are the characteristics, skills, and defining features of both future aviators and guardians?
Grazie, Alessio. Buongiorno, signore e signori. Distinguished leaders, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm even more humbled after hearing Air Chief Marshal Sir Knighton speak. Just amazing words, and I'm looking forward. Hopefully this is recorded because I want to go back and watch that a few more times. But I definitely appreciate also the leaders that we've heard yesterday and we'll hear today for your leadership, as he highlighted, the importance of that strategic and operational leadership that helps develop all of our service members who continue to do the mission. For your question, I appreciate that. Currently, I'm the commander for our Air Force Personnel Center for the United States Air Force. And so the things that I do every day are focused on people, thinking about what do we need to do, how do we help influence policy and resourcing and guidance to be able to affect not just for our Air Force, but our Department of the Air Force to support our Space Force, but also to work with allies and partners, and of course in the larger context of our Department of Defense on what do we need to do to develop those future leaders, where do we need to focus. And so this is a very important topic for me in my role, but also when I look back at almost 29 years of service, having started as a fighter pilot in our Air Force, and now through many different opportunities of serving with partners and allies in different roles and seeing different aspects of business. It's a very complex world that we're in, and we all have a very, very heavy responsibility. And I think to echo some of my former senior leaders, when I took command at the Air Force Personnel Center, one aspect I think that's important for all of us to remember is what we do is never comfortable. This profession of arms, profession of war, if you ever have the feeling when you're wearing your cloth of your nation that you're comfortable, you probably should check yourself and make sure and wonder why. Maybe it's a moment, take a break, take a knee, we all need to do that. But it's very important to remember that, as we've heard multiple times, the changing character of war, the change of our threats, the change of the environment, the complexity of it means that we should always be on edge and ready for change and adaptation because that is what is expected of us. Now, within that small order, I'll highlight a couple things that our current Secretary of Defense has highlighted as his priorities. Restore warrior ethos. That is all about people. What are those characteristics? The spirit of resilience, courage, uncompromising standards, dedication to mission, and self-sacrifice for lethality. Rebuilding the military. So that's a human endeavor. We need to make sure that our industrial base, we're working with our partners in the industrial base, we're reforming how we acquire things to acquire them faster and continue to get the effective and capability that we need. And then rapidly fielding those technologies, which involves the human aspect of making sure that we know what the requirements are, getting that training to the field as quickly as possible, making sure that our operators, that we are able to adapt that technology, and that our leaders know how to lead those teams to employ it. And then reestablishing deterrence, which focuses entirely on our allies and partners and their relationships. What I've heard several times here, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here because relationships are critical to everything we do. Even when I'm up in the aircraft fighting, I'm not there alone. I'm there with a flight, I'm there with an element, I'm there with formation, with a mission package. We do this as a team, and if you're a leader, you are still a member of a team, and so it's critical that we do that together as partners and allies. Now, just for the remainder few minutes here, I want to highlight a couple things that have been mentioned about the new age of warfare and the technology and the pace of adapting to that. Certainly, our tactical level operators will need to field that technology and learn how to use it effectively, and it feels like it comes on more rapidly. In fact, when you're out of the aircraft, like I have been for about 8 years, one of the things you think about if you were to have the chance to go back is that it's probably changed 9 times since I've left. And so where the switches are and what they do and the technology that's there and then the tactics to employ it, those have all changed over and over again, which is good because we need to continue to do that. But it's interesting from a leader's perspective because we have to be humble and realize that the things that we were experts at, we aren't anymore. And so when we think about developing leaders, it's important to think about how do we take that tactical proficiency, retain the value of appreciating, understanding the importance of it, but develop leaders who can bring that then to the operational and strategic level to then enable those who are doing it today to continue to do it most effectively. And that's, again, a tall order, and it's important. And I appreciate Chief Marshal Sir Knighton's comment about experience. Experience is critical. We can't just give people the book and say, learn it and go. Just like time in the aircraft, we need that experience and to be able to learn. But I will say one thing I think that is underused right now that we could do more of and we continue to work on is mentoring. Something that can help with that experience is having that mentor, senior leaders who've been, doing this for 20, 30 years, to stand alongside those young aviators, those young guardians, those young airmen, and help give that experience freely and openly to them as much as possible, to pour into them, to help them, guide them along that experience, to make it much more rich and much better, so that as they have those experiences, they learn even more from that, and something that we can give back as senior leaders to those who follow us. For the last couple minutes here, I just want to highlight a couple things about artificial intelligence, and I think this is a great opportunity, not only because of the promise that artificial intelligence has to support us in our decision making, to support us in some of their technology, but also how it can help remind us what are those innate characteristics of humans that we need to make sure we continue to appreciate and develop. Because it'll be the things that we're looking for in the artificial intelligence, whether hopefulness or through protection or concern. And those are discretion and discernment, right? The ability to be discreet and discern and be precise about those decisions based on the data available. Being able to communicate and understand. If we have an artificial intelligence platform that we can't understand what it's telling us, that's not going to be helpful, but it's the same thing we need from humans. How do we teach and help develop humans who are able to communicate effectively? That's still critical. Ethically aware. As like-minded nations, ethical decision-making is critical, and it's something that we continue to develop also in our people. Be socially aware and humane, develop those relationships. Be responsible and accountable, be reliable, and be a protector. And I like that one because it's a reminder that we're first and foremost called to be defenders of our nations and the things that we hold most dear. And so to be a protector is a critical capability to continue to develop. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, for your views from the strategic to tactical level. And I stress the 2 key points from my notes, that what we do is never comfortable. It's a very thought-provoking sentence. And that experience is critical, and it's something to keep in mind with the changes brought by technological innovation, for example, on training. Now, let me move on this side of the Atlantic with Sophy Antrobus from Freeman Air and Space Institute at King's College London. So Sophy, leadership is strictly connected, is closely connected with decision making. And how do you view this second element of decision making in Western Air Forces?
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to be here. Following on from the keynote address from Air Chief Marshal Sir Rich, who I've noticed has obviously dipped out to have some conversations. I'm quite pleased about that, because I'm going to mention that he's done his own research into this subject. His research paper for Advanced Command and Staff College 21 years ago, which is why I'm glad he's not in the room, because I was going to say that. The psychology of risk, what role does it play in military decision-making? So I'm following on from somebody who knows a lot about this subject, and I'm springboarding off what he wrote to talk about the role of risk appetite to your question on decision-making. My research in recent years has been about the Royal Air Force and its risk appetite, arguing that since the early 2000s in particular, the RAF's very much focused on reducing risk, particularly and initially in the area of flight safety or air safety, depending on what you call it. And I concluded the RAF has gradually moved to a risk-averse stance. Now, there's a few, well, there's lots of reasons that that's happened beyond just an air safety perspective, but a couple of things I'd mention. First, the loss of the Nimrod aircraft in Afghanistan in 2006, with the loss of 14 crew, was the UK's largest loss of life on operations in a single incident since the Falklands War in 1982. It had a profound effect on the Royal Air Force, and it was the reason that a major review was instigated into airworthiness and safety. It resulted in the creation of a military aviation authority and wide-ranging changes in approach to accountability, safety, risk, and culture, all with good intention, but at the same time, perhaps without considering what the RAF might lose in operational effectiveness. Now, we've heard several times from lots of speakers, there's also the context of 20 years of flying in relatively permissive operations in air terms, such as Afghanistan and Libya. And finally, bring to a point that General Goretti made yesterday, and which is something that's very much a feature of what I've been looking at. General bureaucracy across defence continues to grow, and I think that's definitely added constraints on leaders making empowered decisions at the lowest possible level, something General Schneider referred to. Now, Rich also mentioned the geopolitical situation, as have others. As he put it, we face multiple and multiplying threats. And there is an appetite, I know there is in the Royal Air Force, and I'm sure there is across other forces, to shift our appetite for risk to a different level. And that requires a shift in organisational culture. And that's not easy to do. And you can't do it just by having a few more accidents. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. I just wanted to stop for a minute to talk about some research. There's not been that much on military air forces and risk and decision making. But some of it was based on Dutch psychologist Geert Hofstadter's work on national cultural characteristics. He developed county scores for 4 dimensions of societal culture. And later, some researchers in the late 1990s decided to analyse 14 NATO countries to understand the relationship between a country's scores on these societal values and their air force's accident rates. And they adjusted that, of course, for technical malfunction. And they opined that societal culture provides a toolkit of habits, skills, and styles from which people construct strategies of action. I'm going to focus on one of those societal values, uncertainty avoidance, how people react in uncertain or unfamiliar situations, and how much they attempt to avoid those situations with regulation and bureaucratic sanctions. Now, in the 1990s, the UK had a low score for uncertainty avoidance. So people were more used to solving problems independently, acting outside of formal rules, and they were less stressed in uncertain situations. And the researchers hypothesized that a low score on uncertainty avoidance and the occurrence of military aviation accidents would positively correlate. So more avoidance of uncertainty led to more accidents as emergencies threw people into unfamiliar situations which they weren't comfortable with. Now, my argument for the Royal Air Force, and I ask you to consider your other services or other nations' forces, is that perhaps the Royal Air Force has moved away from where its society was in the 1990s because of changes like the implementation of the review into the Nimrod crash, and actually has pushed itself into a more bureaucratic, more regulated organisation. That may mean that today's RAF personnel are therefore less equipped for uncertainty, which may in turn have an impact on their ability to operate and warfight outside of the routine safety envelope, and on leaders making timely, risk-appropriate decisions in high-risk environments or operations. Now, Air Force colleagues in the UK have shared with me their concern that training has become focused on staying inside the regulations rather than applying judgment. Now, I can expand on this in further if you want in questions. I'm talking about things like the factors of having much safer aircraft and better technology, because if you've got better technology, you can measure better whether you're staying inside regulations. But I'll leave that for discussion if we want to. So I'll leave you with an example one colleague gave me, recounting the Jaguar aircraft that he flew in the 1990s. Now, I was terming this a third-generation aircraft, but there is a Harry and mate in the audience who was bantering me yesterday that it really wasn't, sort of more like 2.5 generation. But anyway, I know there are Jag pilots around as well, so I'm not going to get into that. But it had difficult handling characteristics and had an angle attack limit somewhere between 12 and 17 units, depending on the configuration. But during training, the instructors would have students take the aircraft to at least 20, so outside the authorized flight envelope of the aircraft, to see what would happen if the limit was exceeded, and under what circumstances an exceedance would or would not kill you. And that was authorized as part of the sortie. The idea was that you're being put in a situation that would be a known quantity in the event of enemy action, when the enemy, of course, would want to push that aircraft beyond its safe operating envelope. So that's the kind of where the argument I've been coming from around the importance of thinking about risk appetite, of moving away from risk aversion, which has occurred for completely understandable and good reasons. Of course you want to drive down accident rates. Of course you want people's lives to be preserved. All of that is well-intentioned, but I would argue that some other things have crept in with it. And from politicians down, and in myriad areas that go beyond air safety to other forms of bureaucracy and a reduced appetite for casualties. For example, the RAF therefore has become avoidant of uncertainty in its approach to training and operations based on 30 years of relative peace and an admirable aspiration for a zero accident rate. That, therefore, to start with an answer to your question, is where the RAF are starting to realise that risk appetite and risk-appropriate response is so important and affects decision-making and operational mindset more broadly. I think I'm on time.
Perfectly on time. Thank you. Thank you, Sophy, for this very, to my view, to me, very original view on risk and decision-making, including culture and uncertainty avoidance. Actually, I wonder how a risk-adverse culture can cope with the scenario of peer-to-peer conflict and the change of character war that we've been discussing for the last 2 days. I'm also curious about the Italian case study of these comparative studies on NATO countries, because it seems to me that the Ministry of Defense in Italy is at the same time heavily regulated, but also used to cope with uncertainty. Now, let's hear a point of view from Italian Air Force, and namely by Major General Luca Maineri, Air and Space Operations Commander. So, Luca, how does the concept of mission command evolve according to Aeronautica Militare Doctrine, also in relation with multi-domain operation?
Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, it's an honor to be here. So, mission command and multi-domain operation are the new ones of Doctrine, but I think that in the air power domain in general, and more specific in the air campaign planning, we still have to do a lot of clever thinking and trials. Mission command, it's an answer from a demand signal coming from the field, where we recognize that we are facing an environment that is contested, degraded, and operationally limited. So what mission command, in simple terms, is envisioning is the ability to enhance forces to react quickly to a contested, malicious actor and exploit opportunity at the local level with the SA that you have over there. So you take the risk of acting without all the info you would like to have, because the center will not be able to send you the info. And this will require changes in commanders' behavior, in subordinate behaviors, in processes, and in risk, as Sophy was mentioning. But then if we look at the philosophy of mission command, and we overlay this one to the way we plan a mission, what we are discussing here, we are discussing about changing 45 years of combat-proven operation with the air power that it was always been done with centralized command and control and decentralized execution. First time it was mentioned in a doctrine was 1975. So now what? So it's a huge change. That's why I say it will require a lot of clever thinking. There are several nations testing this one. NATO is doing something with it. So what you are generally doing is try to separate command from the function of control and then emphasize the imperative of distribution. That's what you're trying to do. Using, for example, mission type order instead of precise ATO. But then, if you are overlay this one to the way we plan air operation inside a CFAC or a JFAC, going from strategy to task, it gets very complicated. Just as an example, think about targeting. The way we handle targeting generally, it requires a target engagement authority that has at least 1 or 2 stars on its shoulders, so you need to go up the chain to get that authorization. If you want to apply mission command, you'll have to take a risk. That, as General Brown on the US Doctrine wrote, those are big risk. The Italian Air Force is doing something on it. Our idea is that you can use something that we already have in our doctrine, is the TBMF, the Tactical Battle Management Function. Those are tactical functions that we use in air defense to lower authorization to the lower level. So you could try to set up a tactical planning management function that will allow you to pull out of your ATO cycles some function and distribute them in order to apply the mission command philosophy. Multi-domain operation. Multi-domain operation, it's another answer to a demand signal. We are already facing competitors that are challenging us on a multi-domain. So NATO has a definition for this, is the orchestration of the military domains and then the synchronization with the non-military actors. But this is challenging as well. It's challenging because we are trying to answer to 2 different demand signals. Mission command is requiring you to lower authorities. Multi-domain, it requires you to orchestrate domains, and generally, the way we plan our operation, the orchestration happens at the operational level. So that's why I think it's challenging. I have the honor of also being a commander of a NATO entity, is the deployable command and control entity of the NATO. And every time we deploy for an exercise, like we did 2 weeks ago, for the Ramstein flag, it's a NATO exercise, they were planning multi-domain operations and counter A2AD. And one big lesson from that is that the stress that you put on controllers to handle that kind of fight, I think is underestimated. That's another challenge that we will have to face as air power. And finally, last challenge in multi-domain is the assessment. I think it was mentioned even by the chief of the Royal Air Force before. If we look at what Russia and Ukraine are doing, they are learning. They have some sort of an assessment cycle, so they are changing their tactics, changing their capability that they are fielding. Generally, in our exercises, NATO or national, we never get to the assessment. The exercise always finishes before. So we are not trained in assessment. You need to plan for assessment. You need to set up a measure of effectiveness, measure of performance. So plan for it, and then measure it, and then change it again. Now, envision doing this one at the multi-domain level. So now you are assessing and measuring multi-domain effect and resync your battle circle. It will be complex. So I've only mentioned challenges, but I have 1 minute left, and I want to close on a positive note. Mass. mass has always been a principle of war, and if we see what is happening in the Ukraine and Russia conflict, we can say that mass is back, and it is a positive note. It means that the principle we have been conducting our doctrine and fighting are still valid. And in an environment that is always changing, having principle that we can rely on, it's a good news. The second good news is that mass will force us to work better in a coalition. We're not only selecting countries with specific and high-tech capabilities, we need everybody to be on board. And that's another positive news. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you very much for focusing on mission command, its tension with multi-domain operation, and then the change from the duo centralized planning, decentralized execution to something different. Tactical planning function, I mean, a good deal of nitty-gritty and concrete elements with the bottom line for me, it will be complex. Now, I mentioned training before, also Greta did, and let's focus on it with Major General Holger Neumann, commander of German flying units. Holger, digital twins, live virtual constructive training, and the new frontier of synthetic training, how to exploit their advantages and mitigate their risks for the ability of pilots which may be trained with a more limited amount of flying hours.
Buongiorno e grazie mille, Alessandro. Unfortunately, that concludes my Italian language skills, and I do have to switch to English with a German accent. But to enable you to follow me through my thoughts, I prepared some slides, and you should be able to see them behind me. So another big thank you to Generale Goretti for setting up this great conference. And yes, I do have to admit that the audience looks impressive. It's even bigger than a mass brief at Red Flag in Nellis. So that's very impressive to look to view it from here. The slide is up. Yes. One key aspect of doctrinal leadership is training, right? And to find the answer to the question how to prepare our air warriors for tomorrow. During the course of this great conference, we heard many things about the future operating environment, 6th gen, AI, the increasing importance of space, unmanned teaming, and so forth. There will be a lot of changes we're witnessing today, and there will be more to come. But what will remain, and we also heard that on this conference, is the key task of air power, being to gain and maintain air superiority, and to some extent, of course, depending on the structure of your forces, but the space access, right? The way we fight is based on speed, reach, precision, and agility. But I like to add another factor on that, and that is the specific air culture we're living across all air forces and the specific mindset. So it's more than technological advancement and so forth. And all that together means that air will be the first kinetic responder and the premier kinetic responder. So operating in the third dimension, as we all know, means two things. One, we need specialized air systems, right? But on the other hand, we need specialized and well-trained personnel, the so-called air warrior, and that together gives us all the capabilities we need to fight today and tomorrow. What am I talking about? I mean, how to best prepare the air warrior for tomorrow. And Luca just mentioned one big thing concerning, number one, multi-domain operations, okay? And the C2 challenges, there's more, as Luca just mentioned. We also see an increase in wargaming and mission rehearsal, okay? It's very complex. You have to break it down in different sessions, find the best course of action, and then execute it. The introduction of 4th and 5th gen, or the integration of 4th and 5th gen, an advanced air operation is very challenging. You need a lot of training there, but on the other hand, you have to make sure that the information does not go out to a potential opponent, right? You don't want to play all your cards in the face of your opponent. Another very interesting piece is what we see on the digital twin development. We are able to get a grip on mission performance, mission advancement, progress, but also how our systems and even our human operators do. I think that will increase in the future because we will have more demanding missions put on a human being. And number 5 is efficiency. We have to make sure that we keep an eye on our resources and also on our planet. I'd like to introduce you real short to a concept we developed inside the Future Combat Air System project. It's called Collaborative Air Warfare, which is our bridge towards multi-domain operations. And it has 3 major parts. One is fighting. What do we think about this subject? It's one thing is cross-platform. Okay, so we need to get used to fight with formations of manned and unmanned systems, and also handle maybe formations solely comprising unmanned systems. And to follow the idea of multi-domain operations is the cross-domain integration, meaning any sensor will give information to C2, and then any network shooter can execute the mission. Number 2 is commanding. As already been mentioned during this conference, fighting a near peer or peer opponent is different from what we did the last 2 or 3 decades. Okay, mass does matter, and also the speed of decision making. The C2 cycle has to be quicker than the one of the opponent. We did have some studies going on AI support concerning threat analysis, order of battle on the red side, so to speak, and also mission planning. And it's great results. We could reduce things what human would do in a couple of hours could be done by artificial intelligence in a couple of minutes. Number 3, teaming. I think all of us here are pretty familiar and comfortable with commanding manned formations, right? You task your other elements to do things. You give an order to an FAR commander. But how will that change in the future when there's no helmet inside your wingman? Okay. Today is an acknowledgement by voice. In this, my example would be Sniper 3. How do we do that tomorrow? Is it a green light? Will somebody answer in our headsets? Or how do we control and make sure that swarms do exactly what we want them to do? Another big challenge here. Following the idea of rather move information than people, we see great potential in virtual training. Over a decade ago, we introduced the so-called mission readiness training, starting our Typhoon fleet, where we were able to prepare for upcoming missions exercises like Red Flag or TLP or even missions over the Baltic states. And you know, whenever you start doing this, if you show up, and I did it personally, it looks very much familiar, so you don't have to worry about ATC procedures. You're able to practice that a lot, and then you don't have any familiarization flights to do, and you just can concentrate on the tactic part. And of course, the idea would be, following again, moving information, not people, to establish virtual flag exercises, so you can connect forces across the globe between allies and partners, and they train together. Great potential in live virtual contact, which I'll cover in a second. All the things we see now with advanced 4th gen and 5th gen, we need to make sure that we keep it to ourselves. Okay, a lot of the training will happen inside a simulator, synthetically. So we don't have to be afraid of weather balloons or fisher boats with a lot of antennas on it. And also, if we follow that path of combining manned and unmanned systems, how do we train aviators like us, being used to looking outside the window and see, you know, your element on the right-hand side wearing helmets? In an exercise in the air with real flying, you will not see these things because they don't have any annual flying requirements. They're just going to be used for missions, not for training. So blending it together in a live virtual constructed, I think, is the way to go. But as Professor Justin Bronk yesterday said, there are limits to synthetic training, right? And we have, as in many other fields in life, we have to find the correct balance between virtual training and reality, because we all know reality bites. Okay, we have this physical stress on aviators and operators, for example, 9G in a fighter jet. We never have the perfect system performance outside the world. Inside, we have a lot of symmetries, so it works perfectly and looks close to reality, but it's not reality. We have environmental factors like weather, wind, other things that can disturb your mission. We shouldn't forget that we're dealing with other players in real life, not with computer-generated forces. And of course, Murphy is always there and out there. So I'm 6 minutes late, but I guess I got all the ROE. It's 8 minutes sharp and no more Navy quotes. Thank you, Alessandro.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Holger, for sharing the German approach that looks me very, very interesting and very innovative. And many keywords. I mean, Air Force as a first kinetic responder, AI support for command and control, for speed up command and control, move information, not people. Very, very interesting and thought-provoking. And thanks also for mastering PowerPoint warfare. It's a skill on itself. So, last but not least, let's zoom out with a broader question for Heather Penney from Mitchell Institute. Heather, in your view, what does leadership mean today and tomorrow for advanced air forces?
Well, first, let me thank General Goretti for bringing the leaders of our various air forces here together, not only to exchange ideas, but to foster and cultivate our relationships and the trust that we have amongst each other. And the ideas that we exchange will not only improve our interoperability, but our interchangeability, as General Schneider said yesterday, because the alignment that we are seeing between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea certainly poses our Western world and our relationships a challenge, because as we've seen through Ukraine, Russia's ambitions are expanding, and as we've seen through China's behaviors within the Western Pacific, whether or not that's the operations they do surrounding Taiwan, the coordinated bomber formations they're doing with Russia up towards the Arctic, or even their live fire exercises that we see between New Zealand and Australia, it is clear that China's ambitions are not simply to retake Taiwan in their minds, but it's really to become a hegemon of the Western Pacific and to push and reorder the entire global structure. So this is why we are here today and why you've seen the pivot of America towards the Western Pacific, because that is where we see a major challenge, because we also know and trust that our NATO partners and allies within the European theater will be a strong foundation for countering and containing Russia's ambitions. So what does that mean for us? We've seen in the United States a flurry of academic and studies based off of what the lessons learned of Ukraine should be. And this is making us have to rethink what air power means. So we're seeing folks come out with air denial. Air denial is really all air forces need to do. A real obsession with drones, and this is changing the character of war. But I would argue that that actually is ignoring that there are enduring principles of air power, and we risk being effective air forces if we throw those away. You've heard many leaders over the past day and this morning talk about the value of air superiority. Air superiority is foundational to all of our military operations, and space superiority now is becoming that essential enabler to not only allow air superiority to be effective, but also all of our other military services to operate. Air denial cannot achieve air superiority. Air denial, I would actually argue, is simply air defense. Because if you look at Ukraine, you have two post-Soviet armies coming to clash. Their theory of how to employ their air power is really more airborne artillery fires. And the United States, in our experience, we've discovered that whenever you fight a war of interdiction and close air support, you don't win. Those wars come to conclusions in terms that are not what our full objectives are. In order to truly be effective, we need to be able to establish our superiority so that we deny the ability to operate in the air to the adversary, and we have the freedom of maneuver not only in the skies, but on the ground and on the sea. So what does that then enable? It enables strategic strike. We must go beyond close air support and go beyond interdiction to really deny an adversary sanctuary and collapse their ability to operate and generate military power. Strategic strike is something fundamentally different than just hitting targets that are right behind the forward line of troops or the forward edge of the battle area. These are key preconditions towards successfully ending any kind of operation, any kind of military conflict. And I worry that we are learning the wrong lessons from Ukraine and neglecting and throwing away those fundamental missions and enduring principles of air power, of air superiority and strategic strike. Denying sanctuary is utterly essential. Which brings me to what should leaders be thinking of today? And I'll take that down to organize, train, and equip. Organize so that we can optimize for the mission command, for multi-domain operations. Train, and this is a key element of training to enable a risk, enable our young warfighters to be willing to take that risk. And then finally, equip. This is, I think, the biggest challenge that our senior leaders are facing today, and probably the thorniest of issues, and will be utterly decisive regarding whether or not we are able to give the capabilities to our warfighters so that they can be effective to go do the mission over bad guy land, execute that safely, and then be able to come home to regenerate for the next day. Because, as everyone has mentioned, the past 20 to 30 years of post-Cold War strategic complacency has led us to coast on Cold War equipment. If you look at the United States Air Force inventory, the vast majority of our combat aircraft were bought in the 1980s and early 1990s. And because we did not face any kind of peer competitor, we prematurely terminated or deferred and delayed a lot of those recapitalization programs. So now as we see advanced technologies, there's a tremendous optimism towards pursuing those technologies, but we must be conscientious about how we husband our forces to ensure that we can hedge risk and continue to be effective in the near term, even as we are investing in those technologies for long-term fielding and operations. What does that mean? It means we cannot divest to invest. We must maintain the combat capacity and capability that we have today and replace that as quickly as possible. We cannot simply get smaller with the hopes that we will have the time to get bigger, because it is an inconvenient truth that to be an Air Force, you have to have airplanes. So if you get rid of your aircraft, not only do you lose the ability to execute those combat operations, but more importantly, perhaps, we lose the airmen who understand the elements of execution for those particular mission sets. Take, for example, the Air Force's JSTARS, the E-8 program. By divesting the E-8, we also divested a tremendous amount of those experienced airmen who understood how to do air battle management. Once you lose that human capital, that talent, it is very difficult not only to regenerate it, but even more difficult to reinvent that. So we must develop a strategy that allows us to be able to maintain the human talent, maintain the combat capacity, and that unfortunately does mean platforms, it means aircraft, while we reach forward towards those new technologies. Now, at the Mitchell Institute, we've done a lot of studies on collaborative combat aircraft, and I will say, if drones, as we are seeing them instantiated in Ukraine, if drones were truly decisive and dominant, then we would actually have seen that war come to a conclusion. Drones that are being employed in Ukraine on either the Ukrainian or the Russian side are crucially important to those armies, but they are not air power as we understand it. Instead, because Ukraine did not have an air force that was appropriately equipped with the right capabilities and the right capacity to be able to do air superiority and that kind of strategic strike, we've seen that conflict devolve into a World War I style stalemate of attrition and atrocity, which I would argue the only thing more expensive than having a first-rate Air Force is a second-rate Air Force. It's losing. If we think the cost of investing in the platforms that we need and the aircraft that we need is expensive, try losing. So when it comes to collaborative combat aircraft, and we are big supporters of being able to employ and exploit the potential of technology, we also need to understand what where that technology is today, its maturity, and what its potential use could be. We've heard a lot of enthusiasm regarding artificial intelligence, but we also need to understand the physical requirements to be able to execute that artificial intelligence, and we also need to understand the limits of those algorithms and how they are trained. So because folks typically have experience with large language models such as ChatGPT, there's, I think, an over-expectation for what these algorithms can provide in a war-fighting context. I've done a lot of work with the engineers at various AI companies that are working to support CCA, a collaborative combat aircraft, and the missionization of that autonomy is hard. It's very complex. Trying to achieve the level of human performance within that autonomy is very challenging, and we are not yet there today. In order for these platforms to truly be successful, we need to be realistic about their potential, their opportunity, and their current performance. And to achieve that timeline, we then need to field them and experiment and operate with them. So we need to fly and buy, or buy and fly, for those autonomous platforms, as well as next generation combat aircraft. I think I'm probably a little over my timeline. I'd like to go ahead and stop, and that way we can take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you either for a broader critical view on air power, including inconvenient truth, and the point on losing human talent, not easy or very difficult to regenerate, let aside to reinvent. So we have some time for questions. Let's start with the first batch. 2 questions, 2 minutes in total, not per question. Okay, each of you, we're going to have 2 minutes. You can pick and choose where to focus. If you address both, you're going to be great. First question of the duo: how to learn from others' mistake? Meaning mistake of adversaries or mistake by our own leaders or partners. So not just look at the literature telling us the doctrine how to behave well, but how to learn from behaving not well. Second question, some air forces experience a lack of personnel, lack of recruitment, particularly if we combine this with the point that mass is back. So how to cope with shortage of personnel in some air forces now or in the next futures. Perhaps we can go with the same order of the panel. So Jeff.
Thank you. So shortage of personnel, I've had a few conversations yesterday and today about that from various leaders of our fellow air forces. And it's certainly an event that if you haven't experienced or you don't experience it now, you're likely to experience it at some point. And unlike money, I like to say the people, you can't just turn around tomorrow and decide to have more of it. Certainly you might be able to recruit the people tomorrow, but it takes 7, 10, 15 years, depending on what you're trying to develop and grow, to create not only that trained individual, but the experience, as we mentioned earlier, that you need to be able to not only execute, but become that trainer, that train the trainer, the leader of that tactical operational level or the strategic level, and it's a life cycle. We can't just pull it right off the street like private companies can do in many cases and install it into our organization. Our approach to people is to develop from the ground up, and so we have to plan for that. And so it's always important that we push that horizon out, and we're thinking about how do we plan for those workforce changes, how do we recognize changes in society, how do we recruit, how do we retain the people that we have through incentives, and most importantly, recognizing and reminding of the value of service. Why do we serve? And then on the question of sharing and learning from mistakes, I think it goes back to being transparent and having relationships. If we don't trust each other, we're not going to trust to share those things that we learn from each other. So I think it's critical that we build those relationships and then are open and help share, because ultimately we're going to find each other, ourselves together fighting, and the opportunities to have shared before to learn are gone at that point. We're now in the battlefield, and everything before us needs to have been as effective and as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Sophy?
So on the learning from other mistakes, I mean, I suppose a lot of why I wanted to open by talking about risk appetite and the dangers of, I would call it slowly, it's the boiling the frog, where you sort of get slowly warmer until you don't realize you're in trouble. Perhaps you will take that as something to reflect on in other forces. In terms of recruitment, I'll reflect from a UK perspective, but I'm sure this probably reads across elsewhere. I think it comes from the top, and I mean from the political leadership. Unless our politicians are really honest about the risk we face, the threats we face, you know, we had to do, there was all sorts of political discussion a couple of years ago about practicing the text message alert system to tell people that there was an emergency. You know, that went through iterations, months of discussion. If we're that worried about telling people anything, then actually explaining to them the seriousness of the threat at the moment means that we can't then have the conversations as those of us involved in defence and as militaries yourselves about why defence matters, and then why it matters that young people join.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophy. Luca?
Okay, so I already mentioned the assessment. So you need to have a process to learn. Mission command will require commanders to have a different approach on mistakes. You are lowering authorization, so you have to have trust in your people, plus unity of thinking. You need to make sure that within your chain, we have a unity of resolving problem, but then as a leader, you have to take into account that you will have to have a different approach on mistakes, because you are lowering delegation, and that will cause mistakes if we measure it by the way we are looking at it now. Personnel, the way we plan air campaign today is very man-heavy. It is man-heavy. A JFAC of 300 people, it's needed to work on just on a daylight and produce 300 sorties. So if we are doing distribution of that process, you'll even need more people. So automation, AI, which I'm not really a friend of, it's probably gonna help, but you need a culture based on data. And not every nation has a culture based on data.
Thank you. Thank you, Luca. Holger?
The bad news is artificial intelligence and unmanned systems will not solve the problem of HR. We talked a lot about challenges, at least not in the next few years, because we have to learn more about that. So there will be a big HR challenge, because whatever we think of today's operators and the operate in the future will enter a very complex environment that would put a whole big pressure on them, on their shoulders. On the topic of how do we pull the right lessons learned from their lesson identified of what we see out there, I think within the Air Forces present here, we do have a big advantage. This is our debriefing system, okay? So whatever we do, we plan it together, we fly together, then we come back, and then we review it, you know, what was wrong in the planning. Did we cover everything in the briefing, how the mission execution was done, and then we draw our lesson from there and project it to the next one. So I think we should be aware of that huge advantage we have being Air Forces, because that's kind of a daily thing we do.
Thank you.
So drawing together Luca and Sophy's responses regarding mission command and risk appetite, as we leverage artificial intelligence and automation, the value of human cognition, especially in the forward edge of the battle space, whether or not that's in an aircraft or on a small disconnected island, because we know that the future will be challenged within the electromagnetic spectrum. We need to understand how to leverage and trust our young warriors as they make decisions through uncertainty, through chaos, and with imperfect information. Because that's really the value of human cognition, is being able to apply cross-domain or cross-discipline knowledge, judgment, and experience, and apply it in a novel and new situation, or to innovate when faced with something that has been, which is unseen. And we will have to deal with those kinds of surprises within conflict. That is the value of human cognition. So developing that judgment only occurs through training, through exercises, and through the appropriate debriefs of understanding why that individual made the decision they did, what was the context of that, what were they applying, and what were the outcomes.
Good, thank you very much. You have been great with the time management, so let's go with the second batch of questions. Same rules of engagement, so 2 questions, 2 minutes in total for each speaker. First question, I mean, this makes me really smile because I have tons of anecdotes about that. The question is, because of the features, unique features of air domain and air power, air forces often find easier to cooperate with air forces of other countries than with other armed forces of their own country. I know you have plenty of examples of that. So the question is, how do we lower the barriers? How do we change the culture, the organization, the education in a way that help armed forces of the same country to cooperate together, particularly as we talk about multi-domain operation? Second question, shorter and sharper. How do you educate, prepare, and select, in particular, the senior leaders? So let's say 3-star general, 4-star general. Any hint, suggestion, clue about this specific portion of, well, I mean, have a guess, have an educated guess. So 2 minutes, and we'll go with the reverse order. So we start with either first.
I think I'm just going to go with the first question. The second one's very long. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please. Reverse order.
Unfortunately, I didn't fully understand what the second question was, but in terms of...
The second question is, what would you suggest for the preparation and selection of senior leaders? 3-star general, 4-star general.
So for the selection of senior leaders in the United States, this is really down to our civilian leadership in collaboration with our military leadership. So it is culture, it is priority, it is political. I don't think there's anything that we will do to be able to overcome that. But what I encourage them to do is begin thinking about the strategic challenges and the technical challenges, and then also the service-specific challenges, and who has the ability to be able to meet that in a way that can facilitate the outcomes that we want. Can we take risk now and really gut our services to invest in research and development? What is their overall long-term strategy for husbanding the forces? Regarding how to better integrate with our own services, that really comes down to personal relationships among those leaders, and frankly, how we train together. It really does come down to training, that kind of execution, because I think the training and that kind of interoperability through experience and exercising, it will have to lead the technology.
Thank you, Holger.
I think the 2 topics are pretty much interrelated. Because you have to start, as we did a couple of years ago as young officers. I mean, you have to have a certain level of expertise within your field, right? Being a pilot, an operator, infantryman, it really doesn't matter. But you have to have an operational background, okay? But then you, at a specific point in time in your career, I would say roundabout becoming a staff officer, you should broaden your mind, okay? Hopefully you have the chance to work within NATO with other allies and partners. So you see different approaches to the same task. They have different cultural background. Language is, of course, an issue or problem, or, and you know, that's pretty important. And then you have to connect with other services. So everybody understands what each of the services and domain brings into the fight. So when you ever being selected as a 3- or 4-star general, maybe coming up on a joint force command level, you know what to expect from space, air, land, sea, cyber, and so forth. That would be my take. And on the, yeah, as I said, I think it's pretty much linked, the two issues, or the two topics, jointness. And this was, by the way, I think this is the bridge. It's not there yet, but this is the bridge. If we ever want to conduct multi-domain operations, we better get the joint part done pretty early.
I fully subscribe about the joint part of that. Luke, thank you, Holger. Luca.
Okay, so first question. Multi-domain, it's an answer to a demand signal, so we cannot ignore it. Way to collaborate better, probably start earlier. We do joint operation way ahead in our career, so we should start doing joint stuff earlier. That could be an idea. Selection of the leader. I think if I look at the future operational environment, probably risk management capability and the ability to create an environment as a leader that is providing everybody the opportunity to come up with good ideas, because that's, we will need to react and change fast.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luca. Jeff. No, Sophy, pardon.
Right, so on the first question about air forces and working with armies, our strategic defence review at the moment has been very much focused on the integrated force, so really essentially hammering that home. My concern is, I accept the point about air forces enjoying working with other air forces and doing that well, but it's important that air forces, and for example, say the Royal Air Force in the UK, can work with other armies. I think that's just as, if not more important. So I think that's where I go with that. On the educating, selecting 3 stars, I think there's an inevitable tension between what Sir Rich was talking about earlier, needing to be able to adapt and innovate, and having innovative leaders, and the way that the military is a conformist organization. Right, that's just an inevitable tension. There's nothing you can do about that, I think. Well, 2 things. One, if the promotion system specifically recognized risk appetite and appropriate use of risk, people would adapt to that, because you adapt to your promotion system. And secondly, and this is a plug for my academic institute, but other institutes as well, you know, my academic institute develops the next level of air and space power academic thinkers. Our newest doctor, she got her viva on Tuesday. She advised the SDR, the Strategic Defence Review, on space policy as the newest academic qualified as a space policy expert. And those sort of people alongside senior commanders, and she works with them, I think really help.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophy.
I agree that these are connected, and I'll go back to something in my opening comment, is we don't just open our eyes one day and decide, oh, I need to select a 3-star general today. We don't just decide we need a leader to go from a tactical focus to an operational to a strategic, to work with other partners. Competition is, healthy competition is good. That sense of ownership and belonging to an Air Force versus a Navy versus Army is good at some level, and then it needs to transition. And who does that? Who builds the bench from which we select our leaders? We do. This is our responsibility. We help mentor and guide people to transition from tactical, to build those relationships across service, across countries. We build the benches to make sure that we have someone to select from to make those 3 stars and 4 stars. So that's our responsibility, and there's work to be done before you get to the point of saying, who do I pick now? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You have been so good that I'm going to take the risk to make you one last question, 30 seconds each, so the bar is high. The question is, what does they mean? What will mean? What are the implications of uncrewed combat air system? I mean, not the ISR drones that we see in Ukraine or tactical drones, but next generation unmanned, uncrewed aircraft able to do air combat. What are the implications for the doctrine, the training, the ethos, and the ethics of the Air Force personnel? Just your 2 cents, 30 seconds, even 5 words each will be thought-provoking. Who want to start?
I go first. Okay, uncrewed. I think industry and ourselves, we still need to decide if we want an uncrewed airplane that is like a Shahed, very cheap, doesn't fly very well, is not going to turn 9 Gs with you, but it will lower your risk calculation because you can buy many and throw them away. Or you want something that is very similar to a wingman, so it will be very expensive, it will fly with you, pull 9 Gs, have the same sensor as yours, will cost a lot, you will have a few, your risk calculation will change. That's my comment.
Very good point.
Well, I would offer all of the above. I think we need the full spectrum of pretty cheap, mass, and not too precise, not too complicated systems. But on the other hand, if we want to replace manned wingmen by unmanned wingmen, we have to invest a little bit more into that. But on that note, I like to state that we need to start today. Okay, it's not going to be very fancy in the beginning, but we as operators, we have to get used to flying with unmanned systems. Maybe through a simulator first, but then once in a while, do that for real.
I'll agree all of the above, and I think more importantly, again, because this is about the human side of things, is we need to get in front of developing the human piece of this. The cognitive skills and the capacities of each of us are beyond what we currently leverage, and the opportunity to be able to connect that with those capabilities we could develop is what's going to unlock the full range of the abilities and capabilities to use for warfare and other operations.
I like the order in which we've answered this, because I was reflecting that over 20 years ago, when I was a squadron leader in the Air Force, I asked the Chief of the Air Staff almost exactly this question, to which he went, "Oh, I don't think it'll happen anytime soon. We don't need to worry about it." I'm glad that we've moved on, and you have got much more sensible and informative views. I'd only add one thing based on, there's many studies, but one RAND study that looked at the balance of approach that the enemy took and both sides took, depending on whether systems, either in command and control or platforms delivering capability, were crewed or uncrewed. And it's fascinating because the dynamic affects the enemy as well as ourselves.
I think the development of collaborative combat aircraft and those unmanned systems within the battle space will require us to do 2 things. One is really understand the level of sophistication that we expect from them, expect from their agents, as well as the affordability based off of the geography that we expect them to do, the range, the payload, the speed, the maneuverability. In the studies that we've done, collaborative combat aircraft, especially if they act independently or as swarms, can fundamentally change the risk to mission by detonating adversary tactics, disrupting what their game plan is, drawing them off, degrading their situational awareness through electronic attack and other EMSO operations, depleting their weapons magazine. Importantly, if you're going to deplete a weapons magazine, you have to look, taste, smell like whatever their actual target is. And also desynchronizing their operations. Run them out of weapons, run the adversary out of gas, run them out of time as you're then pushing the manned platforms. And then if you have a collaborative combat aircraft working in conjunction with humans, we can then destroy adversaries either in the air or on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've been instructed to end this panel when the countdown reaches 0, whatever it takes. And actually, moderating the panel in front of so many pilots, I'm really glad that we are on time, on target. So I do thank the speakers for their very timely way of sharing their analysis and ideas. I learned a lot from them. And I do thank the audience for the attention and for their question. Per aspera ad astra. Join me in a round of applause to our speakers.
Thank you to all of our panelists and moderator for another inspiring discussion.